Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. I am the GM Philosopher and today we are going to talk about how to GM for brand new players. Now, one of the funnest things of all time is getting new players to join your D&D game, and if they've never played D&D before, or if they've never played even any tabletop role-playing game before, this can be such a fun thing because you get to be the one to introduce this person to this whole new thing of creating intellectual art in a community setting with other players, telling amazing stories with amazing characters, and doing all kinds of cool stuff and having a really fun time. This is such a fun way to spend time with people, to build friendships, and getting new people into that is very special. And to be honest, I love playing with new players, and I have learned that there are some things to remember. And in this video, I'm going to go over the 4 most important things you need to remember, or at least that I think you need to remember, that I have found are super helpful for bringing new players in and showing them the best time possible. And I'm going to keep this very brief because this is pretty simple stuff. You've probably heard some of this advice in other places, but maybe there'll be a point or two here that you haven't heard before. So jumping right into it. Number 1, either use pre-generated characters or schedule at least a few hours for character creation. A lot of GMs use a session 0 for this. So here's the thing. For new players, creating a character in D&D according to the rules, if you follow the rules at all, if you're going to include, let them pick out their own skills, if you're going to let them decide where they're going to put their attribute numbers, if you're going to let them decide what spells they're going to pick if they're a spellcaster, if you're going to let them pick out their background and the stuff associated with it, that is a lot of stuff. And if the person has never played D&D before, I generally find that these are separated into 2 different groups. Some people pick up the player's handbook and they kind of read through it and they just learn how to create a character and they create it because they have a mind that seems to be well suited for kind of discovering that and following that process. But in my experience, a lot more players just don't know how to start. And if you hand them the player's handbook, they're going to be pretty overwhelmed and it's going to take them a while, or they might even be like, this is actually maybe too complicated for me. I have had a lot of very good, fun gamers at my table who have played entire campaigns straight up to epic levels, playing with me for years at a time, who were very overwhelmed by the player's handbook in the beginning. Later on, they got more comfortable. They would grab it, get their spells, whatever. But in the beginning, creating a character, they really needed help. So for this reason, you might want to consider either setting down and creating the character with them or even using a pre-generated character. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll generate one character of each class and I'll use the races from the core handbook that are like best suited to each of those classes. And sometimes I'll just mix them up a little bit to try to throw a little more variety in there. And I'll just be like, hey, what kind of class would you like to play? I'll tell you what, here's a pre-generated character sheet. Play a session or 2, and then we can rework it to match what you would like it to be. But this will get us up and rolling and kind of get you more acquainted with what these things even do. Not too long ago, I had a new player who they looked through the book and they had no idea what they were doing. And they wanted to play a dragonborn bard. And so we created one for them. They played until about level 3. And then they were looking at the player's handbook more. They were brand new to this and they realized, what? Can I change my character? I would like to play actually a tiefling sorcerer instead of the dragonborn bard. This just seems like way more like the character I'd like to play. I'd like to stay the same character. Like, I like the plot arc I've created already, but I just had no idea what I was doing. And the sorcerer tiefling seems to be like, it'd be way better. Could we just like retcon it and create me the same level tiefling sorcerer and plot me down it? And I was like, heck yes, we can do that, because this is a good sign. This is a sign that this new player is learning about the game. They're enjoying the game. They are getting input from other players, from their experiences, and they're using it to help shape their style of D&D play. So this is just an example, but they started out and we did have to sit down for about an hour and a half and create their character. But then, it was worth it. And really quick, I just want to let you know that you can join my email list. You can find a link down in the description. And if you sign up for my email list, you actually get my ultimate plot randomizer for free. It has a bunch of D100 tables to help you create awesome, insane plot hooks on the fly. You can start plot hooks, you can come up with the conflict, you can find the conclusion, and I even have a wild and wacky table on there so you can throw wild stuff at your players and keep them guessing. They're never going to know what the heck is going on. Get that for free by joining my email list, so make sure to grab it if you'd be at all interested in it. I would love for you to have it. To be honest, I kind of prefer helping characters create or helping players create characters unless I think there's a chance they're not going to stick with it, in which case pre-generated character is different. If I think there's any chance that a player is going to be sticking with the game long term, if they seem like a likely candidate, and by now I feel like I'm pretty good at spotting those people. Like I can usually kind of tell someone's going to be sticking around or if they're just jumping in just to see what it's about. So since I have gotten better at knowing that, a lot of times what I will do is I will offer pre-generated characters to people who I think might just kind of be bouncing through, and I'll invest that time into players I think who are going to invest more into the game. Personally, that's just how I kind of roll with it right now. But anyway, so that's kind of my approach. And this leads us to tip number 2. If possible, pair new players up with more experienced players. I'm really, really grateful and fortunate that at my game table, I literally have 4 players who have played all the way from first level to epic levels with me in other campaigns. They are very well acquainted with the rules, with how to generate characters, with how to run the game, the skills, the backgrounds, the spells, etc. And so it's really easy if I have a new player to say, hey, so-and-so, will you team up with them? They've never played before. Will you just kind of help give them a little guidance as we play? If they have questions, they can ask you, that way that the new player can ask the experienced player questions instead of stopping the game and asking the GM. This is very, very helpful. Okay, this leads to tip number 3. Remember that it'll take time to explain things to new players. Try to perform this function without skimming over things. So this is a tough one. This is a super common thing. Sometimes new players will misunderstand or misinterpret even the most basic things. And this kind of also comes back around to there are types of players who really they thrive on reading the player's handbook and understanding it. And then there are those who are overwhelmed by that and they don't really do it as much. So, for example, a lot of players will think that they can fireball enemies with thaumaturgy. This is just an example. I've had many new players think this actually, just because when they read through thaumaturgy, they kind of read through it, they more skimmed through it. They realized there was fire associated with it. So it's I can control fire, right? So that's kind of the idea. Now, this type of situation can be dealt with in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's worth it to stop the game and see. This is the struggle. Stopping the game to explain the thaumaturgy spell is sort of it might take you 3 minutes, might take you 6 minutes, but that's time that the whole rest of the group is waiting, right? And that's time that you're spending kind of explaining something to a player, which is important for them to know. But then there's okay, well, what's the proper way to handle this? Because it is keeping the other players waiting. Here's how I approach this. I try really hard, and this is going to lead to tip number 4, but give me just a minute to lead into it. I try as best as I can to head off those situations by doing this. When a player creates their character, skills are relatively easy to explain. You don't have to go super in-depth into skills. Spells, though, can trip people up, and there are some abilities that can trip people up. For example, understanding channel divinity from a paladin or barbarian rage. Sometimes these trip people up. Also rogue sneak attack damage, when you get to have it. So there are also some warlock abilities that are kind of hard to remember if you're not used to running a warlock. So, and spells are way even more so complicated a lot of times, and they get more so as you get higher levels. So what I'll do is when someone creates a character, I will literally print out, if they don't have their own player's handbook, which at my table, new players generally don't come with player's handbooks. They might buy them later, but they don't have them. So I have one, and then my experienced players all have a player handbook, but the new players generally won't have a player's handbook. So what I'll do is I will make copies of or print out all of their spells, their spell description and stuff, and all the class features they're going to be using that might be at all difficult to understand or remember. So I'll get them printouts of all this stuff before we even start the game. And I'll sit down with them and I'll say, okay, so I printed out, here's your spells, they're on your spell sheet, but also you can read what they do here. and then your class features, you can read what they do here. And here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to just spend just a minute and kind of read through these to understand them a little better, because they're a little bit complicated. And so if you spend just a couple minutes kind of reading through these, and even more importantly, before you want to try to use them in the game, just make sure you read over them quickly as we're coming around to your turn or whatever, so that you have a basic grasp of it. And obviously, if you have questions, I can help you. But if you can just kind of skim over it, that'll help, really help you to understand kind of what you can even conceptually do with these things. Now, this has helped to cut back probably 90% of me needing to explain things like thaumaturgy or, whatever it is while we're playing the game. And this has been very helpful to me. And that really leads me to tip number 4, which is prepare a list of helpful tips to new players to help guide them to become the type of player you'd like to play more with at your table. So this is sort of like an expectations guide, but I don't like to use the word expectations. I like to use the term helpful tips. So some things that I would put on that list. And I haven't actually done this in a long time, just because I've been gaming with the same people for so long. And I do have like 2 brand new players at my table right now. However, I didn't actually do this for them, but we're now at level 5. And there's like one of them that I kind of wish I would have done this again. I used to do this back in the day when I would play with a lot of new players, but this is a really good way to do this. Is I create this like list of like, again, they're expectations, but I call them tips. And on that list are things like, make sure you understand all of your class features and spells. I've supplied printouts, just make sure you read over them. If you have a question about a spell or a class feature, ask one of the seasoned players at the table before you ask the GM, because it can like kind of slow the game down, and the GM would be happy to answer your questions before the game. However, when we're in game, if at all possible, maybe kind of whisper your question to one of the players at the side. That would be super helpful, especially if the GM's like role playing a scene with another player or something like that. Also, things like not talking over other players. There's some like basic etiquette type things, like don't talk over other players. Don't be like super greedy with loot. I mean, unless it's like just part of your player's character and you're like role playing it, don't actually be greedy and just want to keep all the loot to yourself, that kind of thing. Understand that if you split from the party, this is going to kind of create some timing challenges. So unless it's like really pivotal to the story or there's some special reason, generally speaking, in my games, I prefer for the party to stick together. It's not like a hard, fast rule, but it is a helpful tip and something I really encourage. In fact, I encourage it so much that I actually give players a lot of time. Often I'll give them little surprises, bonuses, things like, maybe I'll give them inspiration, or maybe they'll get like a low level magic item or something periodically throughout the game if I notice they've really been staying with the party and not splitting off. Because one thing that can really eat up like time and take it away from the whole story is when one player branches off from the group to do things that are actually not crucial to the storyline, when the group is focused on the storyline, and then one person is just like they want to go shopping and talk to the random zookeeper about something that has nothing to do with the story. Obviously, I love it role play and I love it to go in kind of random directions, and I do have those things happen sometimes. However, I really always appreciate very much when the group is kind of conscious of whether or not splitting away from the party will actually help progress the story, help progress their character arc, or whether they're just doing a random thing because they maybe are bored or don't know what else to do or whatever the case, right? And by the way, if a player is like bored at the table, I should take notice. I should try to engage them more and give them good reasons to stay with the party. I'm not trying to like blame players for that, but it's just something you can put in this list to help them understand that it's even something you want, if it's something you want, right? So just beginning that conversation with a very helpful tips list could be really, really useful in helping players to understand sort of your expectations and how to do it. Because if they've never played D&D before, they probably don't know about the etiquette, and it would be hard for them to understand. They could observe, but it might take 3, 4, 5 levels for them to really kind of get the vibe and understand the unspoken sort of agreements that go on between groups in a role play setting, right? And especially at your table, because every table is a little bit different. Anyway, so there you go. Those are my 4 tips for how to GM for new D&D players and make the experience as good as possible. And another thing that I just want to point out here is that new players are awesome because a lot of times they will bring cool factors into the game that you might not have expected. For example, players wanting to do crazy things with thaumaturgy or prestidigitation. Those spells are kind of hard to understand at first. If you're brand new to D&D and you're just reading the list and you're like, what is even going on? It does all these things. Like, it can be easy to jump to a conclusion that you could do something sort of like adjacent to those effects and it might still work. For example, shooting a beam of fire at someone with thaumaturgy. It can seem intuitive that could be the way it works, though you might not want it to work that way, and it actually doesn't work that way. But sometimes players do suggest things that, while perhaps zany or not really necessarily even are a part of what that spell does, you might find reason to say, you know what, that is actually, I'm going to say, possible within the parameters of what the spell does, and I'm going to allow it. And sometimes it's super, super fun and super cool. And new players sometimes have more freedom in imagining because they just don't know what's going on. So it's like fun. Anyway, all right. That's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for coming by. Give me a thumbs up and a subscribe. Let me know if you like the content. Let me know if you have any requests for future videos. I'm here every single day talking about the best game in the world, D&D. So I will see you, awesome people, on the next one.